This is the story of how we found our apartment and what it takes to rent an apartment in the USA as a foreigner, specifically in the DMV area. If you're new here, my husband and I moved to the USA from South Africa in August 2022. We bought our plane tickets a week before we left, giving ourselves about 10 days to pack up and sell everything we owned. We arrived with 2 suitcases each and spent the first 6 months living nomadically while we lived in strangers' homes looking after their pets. When our 6 months of pet sitting came to an end, we had to make a decision. Do we continue our nomadic lifestyle or do we settle into our own place? If you missed our previous video, watch it next to understand the reason behind our decision. What we soon discovered in our mission to find an apartment is that the idea of finding an apartment is quite different from the reality of finding an apartment. There was a lot about the process we didn't know until we started, and so in this video, I'm going to show you what it took to find an apartment, why we chose the neighborhood we did, and what extra steps a foreigner has to take to secure a lease in the DC area. It wasn't long after the new year that we started our search for our own space. We had 1 month of free accommodation left, looking after 2 of the cutest dogs ever, and the deadline of impending homelessness was looming. Of course, we knew that if the timing didn't work out, we always had the option to secure some additional pet sits. But I think by this time, we'd made up our minds and were ready to have our own space to live in, to create a sanctuary.
Cheers!
Cheers! That we could put our own stamp on without having to live out of suitcases and move every few days. We wanted to feel like we actually live in the States and that we weren't just visiting on an extended holiday. At this point, we had spent more than a month living in the Alexandria area in Virginia, and we were almost certain that this was where we were going to live permanently. The narrowest house in town.
This is where the market is on a Saturday. It's the oldest market in the US.
This is where farmers market started. How's that for a fun fact?
It has loads of history, coffee shops and restaurants, walking trails, and the waterfront. It has all the grocery stores we need, and the blue and yellow metro lines provided a 22-minute ride to Jean's work. On our quest to find an apartment, the first thing I did was download 2 apps to help with the online search. These were Zillow and Trulia. I was initially overwhelmed when I scrolled through all the available apartments, which took us to the second step of the process, deciding what our non-negotiables are. Things work slightly different here in the US, at least in comparison to South Africa and the UK as far as I can remember. A couple of surprises that we weren't expecting when it came to renting an apartment in the States is that microwaves, fridges, and dishwashers are usually all included in the rent. In South Africa, if you rent a place, you have to provide your own. The next surprise was that in some cases, washing machines and tumble dryers are also included in the apartment rental, and if they aren't, the building usually has a communal laundry for all the residents, sometimes on a pay-per-use basis and sometimes for free. The final surprise was the prevalence of community amenities available for the building's residents, ranging from gyms to swimming pools, barbecue areas, rooftop terraces, convenience stores, and even doggy washing stations and bike repair workshops, like having your own town within your building. Armed with this new information about how Americans do apartment living, we realized we need to make decisions about our intended living quarters beyond simply how many bedrooms we wanted and how much rent we were willing to pay per month. As a loose estimate on monthly rental costs, we found that in the DMV area, rental amounts ranged from $1,300 and upwards of $3,000 depending on the neighborhood, views, square footage, number of bedrooms, and the amenities available. So armed with a loose list of criteria, we started heading out to view a few options. What we soon learned was that A, apartment listings don't last long, so you have to act fast, and B, you need to factor in time to schedule your viewings. You can't just show up and expect to see the place, even in a building with a concierge desk. We were certain we were going to take this first Alexandria apartment because we really liked the feel of the building. They had great amenities and it was less than 10 minutes walk to the metro station. The apartment was a little small though, and the carpeting wasn't doing it for us. The price was also a bit more than we wanted to pay at the time. What we learned from this apartment viewing is that we didn't really want carpeting, and we also learned what we might expect to pay in monthly utilities. We were told that we would likely pay in the region of $30 per month for electricity and another $30 or so for water and gas. We were super keen to secure this apartment though, so asked what the next step was. This is where we learned about the application process. For each person who will occupy an apartment, they have to do a background check, which comes with a once-off fee, usually between $50 and $100. Once the background check is done and you've been approved, you can then sign the lease agreement. If you fail the background check for whatever reason, and even if you pass, you're still not obligated to complete the lease. So we paid our application fee and started the background check process for this apartment. But for the sake of thoroughness, we decided to check out a few more options before confirming our decision. I went and saw a few more apartments in the Alexandria area in a similar price range. I was given tours of all the building facilities and I realized how easy it is to get sidetracked by the allure of the communal facilities. I made sure to film each tour I did without Jean and would talk him through everything I'd seen, but also how each place made me feel. Sometimes the communal areas felt really lovely and luxurious, but then in the actual apartment, it felt a bit off. By this time, Jean had been traveling to his office a few times each week from Alexandria and had the realization of what the daily metro ride would be like for him. And so we decided to mix it up and look in a few other locations closer to his work. I went and saw 3 apartments in D.C., 1 really close to his work and 2 in Georgetown. Initially, we had avoided looking for apartments in D.C. because we had learned that 3 different states have different income tax rates and other cost of living taxes. Also, D.C. apartments generally get smaller and more expensive depending on the neighborhood. But we wanted to understand what we'd be looking at if we were to try it and weigh up the additional expense with the convenience of the location and proximity to Jean's work. The first apartment was a hard no. Front door, little storage. Scooters could fit in there, maybe. Oh, wow. Wow, that could be a bedroom, but it's a walking. Oh, no, maybe it is a bedroom. It's a bit sexy. Kitchen's tiny. The second one in Georgetown was the smallest apartment I've ever walked into in my life. So it'd be a couch and a bed. And the third apartment was a strong maybe. We'll come back to that one. By this time, it had become apparent to us that the shorter Jean's commute to work was, the better. So this was added to our non-negotiable list and the Alexandria apartment was scrapped, losing our application fee in the process. If Jean didn't need to go into his office and could work remotely from home, you can bet that we would have chosen a neighborhood out in leafy Tacoma in Maryland, or even somewhere out in the suburbs of Northern Virginia that is surrounded by woodlands and walking trails. But this is our reality. So this new criteria led me to exploring Rosslyn, the first suburb in Northern Virginia, just over the bridge from DC and just 1 metro stop away, or a comfortable walk or scooter ride from Jean's work.
Decision fatigue is real. But right now we're in Rosslyn, which is an area we don't actually know, so we've come to explore ahead of sending inquiries. Right now we're walking to see how far it is to get across into DC.
From Rosslyn.
From Rosslyn.
Although Rosslyn seriously lacks any decent grocery stores, its proximity to Jean's work was a winner for us. So we continued on our search. Having never been to Rosslyn, we set out to explore the area while we checked out 3 different apartments in one day. The first one was a pass. The building was old and shabby, the apartment had carpets, and there weren't many amenities. The second one wasn't too bad, but it was a fairly long walk up steep hills to the metro station. It had great facilities though, but what really put us off about this apartment was the size of the building. It was huge, with so many apartments. And we realized that we didn't want to be in a building that big with that many people. We're kind of antisocial that way. So that became a new criteria: smaller buildings, fewer apartments. The third apartment we looked at that day was in a smaller building, and we loved the finishes. It was modern and sleek and minimalist and had in-unit washer and dryers. It had a gym, an Amazon delivery hub, and an outdoor barbecue area, and was on a quiet street. We were really excited about this apartment, so we paid our application fee and started the process. But in the interest of thoroughness, are you sensing a pattern here? I wanted to make sure that there weren't any other better options. So without John, I viewed 4 other apartments in the area. Some older buildings, some newer buildings, some with great amenities, some with not so great amenities or no amenities at all.
All right, and then you're really at ground level.
2 of these apartments were being let by private individuals, and I realized that the application process is much simpler when you're dealing directly with the landlord rather than the building management agency. They're generally happy with 3 months bank statements and a deposit equal to a month or 2 of rent. Which brings me to that third apartment I viewed in Georgetown.
I'm currently between viewings at the moment. I'm going to take a little breather. The place I'm going to see is just beyond here. And I just want to get a sense of what's around here, because I do want to be able to walk and get out the house. So the thing with DC is that the apartments that you're going to get are going to be a lot smaller, but then proximity to everything that DC has to offer. And of course, Jean's work will be very close. He'd be able to walk to work. And realize there's a whole bunch of cemeteries here. And there's an apartment block right here that overlooks the cemetery. And when I told my folks, I knew my dad was going to say, well, at least the neighbors will be quiet.
It was a private individual letting the place, and the apartment had an eclectic, old, but somewhat regal feel to it. Its location was great, walking or scooting distance to Jean's work and to the main vibey hub of Georgetown. It was close to the river and walking trails, and it was all round charming. It did, however, lack the in-unit washer and dryer. But I showed John the footage and told him all about the location, and once again, we were super excited about this apartment. Now we were conflicted between the ultra-sleek and modern place in Roslyn, which we'd already paid an application fee for, and this quirky place in Georgetown.
And gosh, we knew that it was going to be a big process to get our selves sorted with an apartment, with all the options that are available and all the information that we need to gather and all the viewings we need to do and all the hurdles we need to overcome. But you don't really realize until you're in it the extent of it. This is probably going on, we've been doing this for about 2 weeks now, and today's the day. We have to make a decision. We actually have to sign and pay a deposit on an apartment that we did see in Roslyn. Really beautiful apartment on the interior, but surrounding areas, it's city living. And today's the day we need to finalize on that. And of course, me being me and extremely thorough on my research, making sure we've seen all possible options. It's like juggling balls.
We really grappled with this decision and kept changing our minds, fearful that any day now, one or both of the apartments would be snapped up beneath our noses and the decision would be made for us. Eventually, we made a decision, and so as not to risk losing it, Jean insisted we sign the lease for the Georgetown apartment without him even seeing it. So being a private landlord, there were fewer steps to take, and a few emails back and forth, we had the paperwork ready to sign. It was around about this time, though, that I felt the need to insist that Jean see the place before we sign on the dotted line. Thankfully, the gentleman was available and gracious enough to permit Jean to view the apartment, and thank goodness he did. Because when Jean walked into the apartment, it was apparent how small the space was for him. He could hardly move in the kitchen or the bathroom, and I'm not even sure the length of bed Jean needs for his height would have even fit into that bedroom. But we thought that somehow we could still make it work. But what clinched it for us, though, was the reality of having to go down several floors every day to do laundry in the communal laundry area. When we compared that reality with our other contender, we realized that we'd found our apartment. Okay, it is now the next day and it has been a whirlwind of emotions. I particularly get anxious when there are adulting things to do, and this is one of those things. We are at this point in the journey where we have signed a lease on our first American apartment. But of course, being a foreigner in the USA without a credit history, signing a lease is not as simple as you'd like. We had to show proof of our legal presence in the country, obviously proof of our ability to afford the rent, but more importantly, we had to buy an insurance policy to cover a year's worth of rent instead of a deposit. So instead of having a credit history, we took out insurance with guarantors.com, which was really quite a smooth process. And once we'd bought that policy, we could sign the lease and the apartment was ours. It is now done. There's no going back now. So now, here we are in our beautiful apartment in Roslyn. Walking distance from the Iwo Jima Memorial, Arlington Cemetery, Memorial Bridge, and the National Mall and Monuments. And we couldn't be happier. That month-long search was totally worth it to make sure we got the right place for us. And we learned a lot about what it takes to secure an apartment as a foreigner in the USA. If you want a tour of our minimalist apartment, then be sure to subscribe, because that'll be the next video coming up. Until then, bye.